We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Rođen je u Ženevi 1962. godine. Tu je diplomirao filozofiju i francusku literaturu, a doktorirao islamske nauke. Potom je stekao tradicionalno islamsko obrazovanje na Al-Azharu u Kairu. Od početka svoje akademske karijere najviše pažnje posvetio je izučavanju muslimanskog identiteta na zapadu, islamskom reformizmu i Bliskom istoku. Za jedne je kontroverzna ličnost, dok je za druge vodeći islamski mislilac na zapadu. Gost emisije Recite Al Jazeeri je Tariq Ramadan.
Professor Tariq Ramadan, hello and welcome to Al Jazeera. Now, in your work thus far, you have been dealing with a variety of topics, from Muslim identity in the West to contemporary Islamic thought, all the way to Middle Eastern current affairs. Now, the title of your latest book is Islam and the Arab Awakening. Really, how Islamic is the Arab Awakening?
First, I think yes, there are different fields on which I'm working. The last one that you're referring to, it's connected to my last book, The Arab Awakening. And I think that first, I'm not talking about an Arab Spring. I never talked about an Arab Spring or an Arab or revolutions even. I said we are far from that. I was from the very beginning cautiously optimistic and saying we have to be very cautious. Now, what we saw after the uprisings and when the dictators were removed is the first people to be elected were Islamists in Tunisia and in Egypt. And still, even with them or without them, these are majority Muslim societies. So they have to deal with Islam as a reference. All the question was which type of reference. And in the book I was saying we need to go beyond the polarization between secularists and Islamists, which in fact now it's proven right. What my point was, because you see what is happening in Tunisia between the secularists, the Salafi and the Nahda, there are tensions. In Egypt, this was the polarization between secularists and the Muslim Brotherhood, and then the army, which never left, took over again. And then this is what is happening. So beyond the polarization, there are 5 main challenges that are, in fact, connected in one way or in another with the Islamic reference. The first one is about how do we act against corruption in a society. The second is the role of the army and the civil society, is how do we go from a military system to a civil system. Third one has to do with the nature of the state, because some were saying an Islamic state and others were saying a civil state with Islamic references. This is also a discussion also about the secular dimension. The fourth one is very much about the educational system, which is important. And the fifth one has to do with social justice, the role of women, and all this has to do with the Islamic reference. So I think that the uprisings were bringing together lots of questions that were connected to Islam. And the last challenge that I'm mentioning in the book is the cultural side, because this is very important. We should not reduce the Islamic reference to rules, halal and haram, lawful and unlawful. We should refer to cultural well-being, arts, creativity, which is part of the whole process.
Now, looking at all those young men and women in the streets of Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, Syria, can they really be pigeonholed into secularists and Islamists?
That's a good question, because I really think that the young people who started in Tunisia and in Egypt, to start with the 2 main countries, they were not driven by Islam. They were driven by acting against the dictators. And they were asking 3 things: more justice, more dignity, and more freedom. And then, of course, the economic reasons, Bouazizi in Tunisia was killed himself because of economic reasons, not because of policy or politics. He was asking, and he was facing survival in economic terms. So I think that all these young people, they were asking this. Now, as we saw it, when the dictators were removed, the old, political apparatus and parties were involved, and they gained or won the last election. But I still think that implying what is implied in your question is that this young is a new generation of people. They are using the new means, you know, Facebook, Twitters, and all this to mobilize the people. Their power, the strength of the movement was not having ideological binding and being against the dictator. But it's proven now, and it's visible that the strength of the movement was its weaknesses when it came to propose something as an alternative, where we didn't have the political thinking, the vision for the future. How do we transform a society for a more dignified and free society?
Now, some analysts have put forward the thesis that Islamists have hijacked the Arab Spring. Have they really done so?
No, I think that all this, you know, it's as if the Islamists were outside the country or outside the political realm. That's wrong. Anyone who was to study Tunisia or even Libya or Syria or Egypt would know that, in fact, they were part of the political system. They were sometimes repressed, tortured, but they had a credibility. They had credential within the society. So I think that this is something that you cannot deny. Now, they didn't hijack. Maybe sometimes they came afterward, and this happened in two countries, in the great majority. The only country where they have been involved from the very beginning in Syria. But in Libya or in Tunisia or in Egypt, the young people, the young generation were starting the whole process, and they
Now, many innocent people have been killed since the start of the Arab Awakening. Yet, when we look at what we can refer to as the preliminary results of the Arab Awakening, there's still a long road ahead before these countries can be deemed safe, stable, and functioning democracies. Was the loss of all these innocent lives really worth it?
Look, the way you put it is when we are very positive. And I, from the very beginning, was much more cautious about this. I don't think that we were witnessing revolutions, and I think that when in 2003 George W. Bush said, coming to Iraq, this is the starting point of us promoting democratization in the Middle East, we heard that it was about democracy, but in fact it was not. The Iraqi pattern is working here, where the whole process was destabilizing the country, removing the dictator, destabilizing the political regime and the political system, protecting the economic resources, and having fractures within the society between Sunni and Shia and even tribes and clans. This is what is happening in Iraq. If now you go and you look at what happened in other countries, you think what he said in 2003 about democratization happened in 2009 and 10 in Libya at the time we are talking now. The regime is completely scattered. There is no real power. Tribes are struggling and fighting each other. Oil is protected. Reconstructing the country is done by foreign. And this is what we are now witnessing. Come to Egypt, where now, after all this, a complete destabilized country, the army taking over, and then who is supporting the army? It's the Americans. Come to Tunisia, Shia, Salafi against Nahda, against secularists, and we have a situation. Go to Syria, exactly the same. Go to Lebanon, and you will see all this. So I think that our hope at the beginning was legitimate in the sense that we are happy to see the dictators removed. But I think that we might now witness the reality of the Middle East with destabilized countries, under control economically speaking, and in terms of security, while at the same time nothing is changing in terms of democracy. Add to this that there is an actor in the region which is benefiting from all this, which is Israel. While it's all happening, they are carrying on their policy of colonizing and making the two-state solution an impossible solution, because it will be over. And we are talking about all these people who are killed while we are forgetting what is happening over there.
Now, the United States has for a number of years been financing non-governmental pro-democracy organizations throughout the Middle East. They organized training courses, provided seminars, and even directly financed certain projects. Yet, when the Egyptian military tore down a legitimately elected government in Egypt, the US stood idle. What do you make of that? Would you call this Western hypocrisy?
Oh, it's clear that there is a great deal of hypocrisy about, you know, the concept of democracy, the way it's used. Because if you look at what is happening you know, who are the people, who are the countries, who are the allies of the United States in the region? They don't care about democracy. They care about geostrategic interests. Now, what you are saying, it's even worse than that. You are saying that they were NGOs, the American NGOs supporting democracy. In fact, before the coup d'etat, the 30th of June, they were helping and they were acknowledging that they were giving money for promoting democracy. In fact, the fact that the people were coming to the streets and they were going to remove Morsi was presented as democratization in Egypt. An elected president who was just removed, and they played with him. And this is what we should say, that the president Morsi was naive in this, in the way he dealt with the Americans, he dealt with the army, and he dealt with his own society. He was not inclusive enough. He was not reaching out and getting the people with him. And I think that these are mistakes that are really deep and huge mistakes in the way they were dealing with power, while the Americans played with him and they were supporting, you know, the counter power and the military against. But what happened in just before the 30th of June, supporting the people, if we were to study what happened before the first so-called revolution, you will see that it's exactly the same. People were trained in the States by the State Department, Freedom House Institution, Albert Einstein Institute, all this, Google even, they put money to train these people. For what? In fact, to remove Mubarak. And as the personal advisor to President Sarkozy told me, Henri Guénaud, he told me, you know what? It's not a revolution, it's an internal coup d'etat. He told me this 2 years ago about what happened in Egypt. And when I was to go to Egypt, because I wanted to go back to Egypt, what I got from my own government is to say, don't go, the military are still controlling the situation. This was known, so all the people who say, oh, all of a sudden we realized that the army is taking over, were naive or hypocrites.
Now, in 1992, Professor Olivier Roy predicted the failure of what is known as political Islam. Is Islamism about to fail or fundamentally mutate?
No, I think he was wrong, and I think that in fact I had many discussions with him, and even with the demonstrations and the uprisings, he was calling them post-Islamist revolutions. He'd say, look, they came after and they won 2 elections, and all the elections. In fact, if the failure is the taking over of the army, I think that this is not the point. And I think that no, it's not over for political Islam. And my hope is this, is I have to acknowledge the fact that they have and still have credibility on this in the streets. It's true in Tunisia. Whatever we can say, they have credibility. If not, why didn't they wait till the next elections and see the Muslim Brotherhood being, beaten then? That's not the point. The point is that they know the credibility, and this is why they were so tough recently in Egypt with the Sisi with them. Now, my hope is now, as I said, because it's not dying, because it's not dying out, because it's still there and it still get credibility, my hope is from within this trends for political Islam really to go through an intellectual revolution, to change the thing. But to go so quickly by saying it's over, I think it's not the reality. It's not what we are witnessing on the ground. Now, my hope is to go beyond that.
Right. Now, Islamism as a term has been used to refer to fighters in Mali, the Justice and Development Party in Turkey, the Justice and Development Party in Morocco, and Nahda the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, Syria, Kuwait, and even Al-Qaeda. Why is confusion regarding this term so rampant?
That's a very important point. In fact, this question could have come before the previous one, because when we say it's the failure of political Islam, we have to define what do we mean by political Islam. Because as you said, it's just the range. It ranges from the violent extremists to the reformist, and even the AKP of someone who is talking about himself, saying I'm a conservative Muslim, a Democrat, a Muslim Democrat, referring to the Christian democracy that we had, for example, in Italy and other countries, in Germany as well. So it's this. We don't know what we are talking about. And depending on our interest in the West, we put people into Islamism and we put them outside. So, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood are the same, should be the same and not far from the terrorists, and we play with this. So we need to be very clear. The first thing that we have to do within academia and with the people who are listening and watching us is be careful. We have to define. You have violent extremists, we have to qualify Islamists. You have reformists, you have literalists, and we also have literalists. For example, you will never have people call, for example, the government in Saudi Arabia or in other countries like in Qatar, Islamist. Why? But what are they saying? They are saying, for example, if you listen to the religious authority in Saudi Arabia, there is no democracy in Islam. And what we are implementing is Sharia. So how do we call people implementing Sharia, refusing democracy, and saying, we call them Islamists? But they are not Islamists. Why? Because the West wouldn't accept being supporting Islamists, while in fact they are supporting a very narrow understanding of Islam, very repressive regime, but allies in terms of economy and geostrategy.
Right, now let's move on to Europe and the topic of European Islam. How different is your understanding of European Islam from that of Bassam Tibi's?
First, there is something on which he is right. I never spoke about Euro-Islam. It's his terminology. I spoke about European, to be a European Muslim and European Islam. Euro-Islam for him is something which he defined. For me, I think that my relationship to the scriptural sources and to the Islamic reference, it's one of faithfulness. What I want is to be faithful to the principles. Now, being faithful to the principles doesn't mean that I am not acknowledging the new environment we live in. So how do we reconcile the two? And then for him, the way we are a Euro-Muslim is as if we are losing our Islamic identity and accepting everything which is Westernized. My take on this is, I'm a Muslim, I have principles, I have a practice, and I want to remain a practicing Muslim. So I'm not going to drink alcohol to please the West. I'm not going to forget about praying. I'm not going to stop fast. I'm serious with the text and I'm serious with the practices. And I think that this is possible. Freedom of conscience in the West means it's possible. Now, when, for example, he's saying, when you listen to someone referring to Sharia, it means that he's an Islamist. And he was saying this about me. I say, hold on. What is the definition of Sharia? If Sharia means we're in the very narrow penal code and hudud that we have, of course we are not, this is not the definition of Sharia. For me, Sharia is the way towards faithfulness. It's the way you are faithful to the Islamic principles. You say the Shahada, La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah, meaning there is one God and you follow the messenger, you are a Muslim. And as you are a Muslim, the first steps that you are going, is Sharia, is how to remain a Muslim. So when I am in the West, and I am in my country as a Swiss citizen, and in this country, you have to abide by the law of the country. And the law of the country is telling you, you are white, you are black, you are a man, you are a woman, you are rich, you are poor, you should be treated equally by law. I said, this is my Sharia. So my Sharia is an open space, inclusive of all what is good wherever I am in the world. Look at the point, which is much more assertive. I don't have a problem of being a European Muslim. I am confident with my principles, and anything which is good coming from a mind which is not a Muslim mind is mine as long as it's good. So this is the difference between him and me.
Right. In 2008, the now former Archbishop of Canterbury gave a speech whereby he said that in the near future, certain elements of Islamic law will find a way into the UK legal system. Now, in your book, Radical Reform, you distinguish between two types of Islamic legal norms, those pertaining to mu'amalat and those pertaining to ibadat. Now, my question to you is, which Islamic legal norms can be applied in the European Union without clashing with the mostly secular legal system?
That's a very important question, and when Dr. Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, was referring in his speech, he was referring to my work. If you listen to his speech, he was referring to what I was saying. And this is where we need to come to a better understanding of Sharia. Sharia is not a closed system. So when he was referring that we need to accommodate a space for Muslims, he was saying, in fact, it was understood as a parallel system. He was not saying this. He was saying within the British system, there is a space for Muslims. And in fact, it's already there. And it's there for the Jews. It's there for the Christian. It should be there for the Muslims. I defended him by saying, well, this is what he meant. He didn't mean a parallel system. While I came back to the Muslims say, even though it is what he meant, and on this he is right, as Muslims, I don't think that we need this. We don't need a parallel system. We only need from the countries we live in, UK, France, all the European, even here in Bosnia, what we need is for the state to be consistent with its own values, to implement equally the law of the country. And as Muslims, what we have is, within the latitude of the common law, we have a flexibility with our legal system as Muslims. And we can find our way, for example, when it comes to marriage. We can take the civil marriage in the West as a religious marriage. We don't have a problem. We Muslims, we need to be more creative in the way we deal with our instruments by knowing better the society within which we live. It's as if sometimes we come with our principles, we come with our references, and we don't know how it works with the legal system. I don't need a parallel system. I need to know the scope and the latitude within the system and within the legal common law, the legal common system, I mean, that we need to study. And then you can see that we can have contract in Islamic terms that are the same as the civil contract. And this could be a marriage that is accepted by Islam and conform to the legal system. So this is where I understand what he wanted to say, but the only fact that he used the concept of Sharia, it created a controversy. Look at what is happening in the United States when there is an anti-Sharia bill in 23 states now. People are using the concept. We as Muslims, we should refuse people demonizing our terminology. We have to reappropriate our terminology by coming with a true definition. Sharia is not a closed system, it's not the penal code, it's an open system, and we can take from all the legal traditions around us, and we can be completely, fully Muslims within the common law, if and only if the common law are applied equally. This is what I'm saying to France. When they come to me and say, you want specific laws, I say, no, I don't want specific laws. I want the same laws for us and for you, but I want the state to implement the laws the same way.
Now, some say Tariq Ramadan wants to reform Islam. To what extent is Islam reformable?
This is what I heard when I wrote Radical Reform. People were saying, oh, he wants to reform Islam. And say, look, let me be clear on this. Islam is not to be reformed, and it's not reformable. What I want to reform is the Muslim minds, which is completely different. To reform the way you think, not to reform what you are thinking about. Islam is a religion within which you find the fundamentals, the means to change with time and to get a better understanding, in fact, the process of being faithful within history. This is Islam. Now, the problem is not Islam. The problem is the Muslim minds. The way we read the sources, the way we understand, we have a lack of understanding of our reality, of our societies. We have a lack of understanding of our psychology, and we have a superficial reading of our sources. So the true revolution I'm calling is an intellectual revolution. We need an intellectual revolution. I would like to see young Muslim minds, and not so young, but Muslim minds, being more creative in the way they deal with the sources, being more profound in the way they study, and to be more courageous in the way they propose. Let us talk about which type of Muslims we need today, instead of talking about reforming Islam. The people who are saying this haven't read anything about what I have written so far over the last 30 years.
Right, but do you have hope that European Muslims can spearhead this process of reform?
They have to reform their mind, because we are at the forefront of new challenges. We are dealing with societies where sciences is very complex. We have to deal with this. Where we are dealing with environment, we are dealing with civil society, we are dealing with the crisis of contemporary democracies. Because people are telling you, you know what, we don't want religion to take over. I agree, let's avoid the dogmatic religious mind to take over. Who is now taking over the states? Not religions, but economy. There are enterprises, transnational corporations deciding for us with no democratic processes. We decide for the president or the prime minister, and he's under the supervision of economic powers. So to come with a state under the authority of economy, while we didn't want the authority of religion, means we have to be critical with the new type of democracies we have under the authority of the global economy. So we are at that level, we European Muslims who are facing this. So instead of coming with very old, references to our principles, let us face the reality and being just to study this and say, are we contributing? For years, even here I heard this, integrate to the West, integrate to the European culture. I say, I don't care about integrating. You know why? Because we are already Europeans, we are already Westerns. My question is, are we able to contribute? It's about contribution. I call it a post-integration era, where after integration it's time to contribute. In the Balkans, in Eastern Europe, in the States, in Australia, in Japan, everywhere we are, we should be a force of proposals and creativity, which today is not happening. You know why? Because we are nurturing victim mentality. We like sitting like this and say, we blame America, we blame Europe, we blame the others, we blame the world, and we avoid looking at the mirror of our own failures and weaknesses.
Professor Tariq Ramadan, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you so much for your invitation.